the business school here. And in just a minute, I'm going to introduce Chris Ball. Chris and I are co-hosting this event. It's co-hosted by the Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series and the Session Chair for International Economics in the business school. So I think we have a wonderful panel here. Chris is going to introduce all of our panelists. And the only thing I want to encourage you to do is to make sure after the program, if you do get a chance to please check out our brand new Terry Goodwin Financial Technology Center, which has moved here from Tater Hall to the School of Business. There are 50 dual screen workstations, 13 Bloomberg terminals, and all of the real-time financial information that our students can use in all of their finance, economics, and accounting classes. So we're very happy to have that center here. It's a showcase for us, so if you get a chance, please do check it out. So without further ado, let me introduce Chris Ball, the Sechenier Chair of Economics here in the School of Business. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much. So let me welcome everyone, welcome our panelists, and thank you for taking time today. Mr. Kreuzer also had to fly over here for this, so we are especially appreciative. The format tonight will be, it's a panel, but we thought we would start with giving each speaker about 5 up to 10 minutes to tell a little bit about their perspectives, and then we'll open it up for question and answer for the remaining time. So we'll go through each in turn that way. So let me tell you a bit about each of our panelists, and then we'll go through in order. So in the center we have with us today Mr. Konrad Kreuzer. He's chairman of E.ON Hungária and E.ON Slovakia. Under Kreuzer's management since 1997, E.ON Hungária has become one of Hungary's 10 largest companies in terms of revenue and has been a top investor in Hungary since 2006. E.ON, the main company based in Munich, was established officially in 2000 and is the largest privately owned energy supplier in the world. I used to say Europe, but he corrected me today. Mr. Kreuzer studied law and management at the University of Munich. He taught law in Germany and has always maintained an active interest in education. We're pleased to have him back. This is our second visit with Mr. Kreuzer. I can tell you he's also an avid sailor and spends a good bit of time when he can hiking. He also, I would be pleased to announce, hosts our students. We take an MBA group to Hungary every summer, and E.ON kindly hosts us at their headquarters for a good half day to discuss energy in the region with us. To the left of Mr. Kreuzer, we have Robert Lahey. Robert is the Vice President in the Investment Banking Division of Ardour Capital Investments, which was founded in 2002. Ardour Capital is a leading research and investment banking firm exclusively focused on energy technology, alternative energy and power, and clean and renewable energies. Ardour Capital publishes in-depth company coverage and industry-specific research and offers a full range of corporate finance, investment banking, and capital market services. Robert holds a BBA from George Washington University, a JD from the New York Law School, and an MBA from Fordham University. I could have asked for a few private stories I could tell about him, since some of us happen to know his father, but I decided not to. Instead, I will comment that Robert has specialized, at least publicly somewhat, explaining legal process coming out of Washington and how it affects the investment side of energy and how that impacts in different ways various stocks. He was on CNBC earlier this summer talking about the Clean Energy Bill, and he's written several pieces for the Renewable Energy World, which you can find online. He told me that recently he's been spending a lot of time traveling around to Europe and trying to explain the different effects of the various bills that are coming out of Washington that seem to confuse not only us, but the Europeans as well. We're very pleased to have Robert Lahey with us as well. Last but not least, for sure, is Joshua Venter. Mr. Venter is a portfolio manager and director at Ingalls Snyder, where he specializes in equity analysis and the management of individual retirement and institutional portfolios. He is a member of the New York Society of Security Analysts, the CFA Institute, the director of the New Haven Development Corporation, and chairman of Technology Investment Fund of New Haven. Mr. Venter graduated from Colgate University, and I'm very proud to say he studied mathematical economics. As an economics professor, welcome. He attended Colgate Economics London Study Group and later Harvard Business School's Corporate Finance Management program. Mr. Ventnor served as an officer in the U.S. Navy and earned Navy Achievement Medal. In side comments, he's a fan of jazz. I did find a comment about Duke Ellington in New Haven many years ago, where he happened to catch Duke Ellington teaching a school of, I guess, grad students at Yale, perhaps. I'll also say that the company Ingalls Snyder prides itself on its intense customer service. They pride themselves on knowing each of their customers, on knowing each of their customers' names. And the reason I mention this is it fits very well with Quinnipiac and our faculty-student relationship. We also pride ourselves on knowing each of our students, bringing you into our classrooms, bringing you into our lives, and developing you while you're here. So it's a special pleasure to have you with us today. And without any further ado, let me begin the panel discussion. We'll open it with Mr. Konrad Kreuzer. We'll take about 5 to 10 minutes. Please do not rise unless you feel the urge to stand up here at the podium. And tell us a little bit about E.ON and energy in Europe.
Yeah, Chris, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here again. I did not know that I am the first on the panel because I prepared for being the last one. So I tried to be the first one. Sorry about that, but it's a pleasure to do so. If I should speak, and this is the headline of the panel, about investing in green energy, and if I would speak about Hungary, then I could close already because there is no green energy in Hungary so far yet. So you are expecting maybe I should look a little bit beyond Hungary, and then I'm able to talk about green energy as well. It's an interesting topic for all of us. I think it's a very important topic for private and worlds and for companies. And what would happen if we would have this panel 20 years ago? I believe nobody would be really interested in green energy because green energy at that time was not at the table. So should we be happy or should we be sad about it? Those who are investing in green energy and earning a hell of money, they are happy. Those who only have to invest and don't get it back, they are maybe not as happy. What I would like to point out is, because 20 years ago we didn't talk about green energy, and today it's in many of the countries, maybe in all of the countries, topic number one. I can speak only about Europe. Please do understand, I do not know so much about the States, but there are specialists who know it much, much better. Why is green energy on the agenda and topic number one, central issue in the world? I think there are not so many driving forces, but there are some driving forces. And one of the main driving forces is the headline of climate change. And I think we are all concerned about this issue because we all feel that we are going into the wrong direction if we don't change our energy policy and our energy behavior, let me say so. And this is 20 years ago starting the green movement in Europe. And now it's more or less official policy. What does it mean for us and especially for companies? I think, first of all, there was politics who changed their mind and who were driving us into a different power generation behavior. We are mainly producing in all of the countries energy out of nuclear, out of coal, out of oil, but not so much out of renewables. And this renewable market was not created by itself or not created by a market force. It was created by politics and governments. We should have it in mind. And even the increasing importance of green energy is more or less a government decision and a government regulation. It's not yet a real market. I do say this many times before I go into details because people who are investing, companies or private persons, would like to know, is it a market environment we are living in, where the rules are set up by the market, or is it a regulated environment, mainly made by politics? Until now, it's a regulated business, which means that governments are deciding about the environment we are investing in. As long as governments are following sustainable policy, as long as governments are following sustainable regulations, as long as we can rely on government decision, even on government guarantees, the business is fine. If we are not trusting so much, because also politicians are dependent from those people who are electing them, we have to take into account that there is a kind of risk inside the business we are doing. As companies are concerned, why we are going into renewables? We are going into renewables because we are pressed, more or less, to go into renewables. We have in the European Union, we have a new policy. It's called 20-20-20, which means we want to achieve a certain amount of reduction in CO2 emissions. And this reduction can be achieved only if our power generation park is switching from coal to renewables, mainly from coal to renewables. And therefore, it's a kind of pressure. And all the European countries have to apply to this rule and have to reach this kind of market shares. This is one of the reasons why the company I am working in is setting up a new strategy, which means in more or less concrete terms that for today we have maybe 10% of our power generation in renewables, but in 2030 we want to have 30% of that in our portfolio. What does it mean for today? It means for today that we have invested from 2007 to 2011 circa 10 to 12 billion US dollars, and we are going forward with the same amount of money, maybe even increasing our investments in renewables. The other important point, we do not have only the European Union concerning my company, we also have the German government. And for today, the German government is even more ambitious in renewables and in green energy than the European Union is for today. The German government recently decided that they wanted to come at least in 2050 to a reduction of CO2 emission especially in the household sector, up to 90% reduction. So this means that the challenge we have to face is very big, and all these issues have to be financed. And we are very confident that we can achieve it, but we know that the investment challenge is very, very big. And what do we say in a general context? We say that if there is a real commitment of the European Union, and if there is a real commitment of the German government, and if there is really a global commitment on the global energy issue, then we are absolutely confident that we can achieve this goal. But without these commitments, it will be very, very difficult. And one of our experiences I would like to add is the following. Green energy was in the past a kind of dream. Now this dream becomes partially real. But it goes hand in hand not only with a financing challenge, it also goes hand in hand with costs. And the question is, green energy is nice as long as it doesn't cost anything. But green energy costs a lot. And we all, the consumers first, have to pay for it. And the question is coming back to the politicians, if they are able to translate it into the people's mind and to explain that green energy is not for free. So if we want to if we are facing the climate change, and if we want to contribute to reduce the emissions which are creating this climate change, then we have to pay for. As an energy company, we have to send out the bills to our end customers. All the others are behind the stage. We have to face it one by one and face to face. And if we do not want that our receivables in the company are increasing tremendously, we need a political commitment and a political communication. For the time being, I learned that even in the States, political programs are given. Political implementation is quite a difficulty. Thank you very much.
We're going to end with a company's issues with the political process. I think that naturally leads to some comments from Robert Lahey. We'll turn the microphone over to him next.
Thank you, Professor. First, it's great to be here at Lender School of Business. My employer, Ardour Capital, does nothing but renewable energy and clean technologies. So I hope that Konrad is at least a little wrong on some of these points. And I also have a relative who works here at Quinnipiac. So for me personally, it's very exciting to see Quinnipiac take the lead in green energy. First with a very significant direct investment in renewable electricity generating technologies over on the York Hill campus, and now with events like these. So very happy to be here. My firm, Ardour Capital, is, like I said, we do nothing but clean and renewable technologies. We define that to include about 12 technology verticals, and some are more expensive than others. I'll try and name as many as I can off the top of my head. So we have solar, wind, biomass, biofuel, bioplastic, geothermal, water, recycling, fuel cells. The last one is the most expensive probably, and the worst investment for you. So it's a wide spectrum. And of course, energy efficiency and energy storage, and by that, advanced batteries. So there's some opportunities that are more exciting than others, and there's some low-hanging fruits as well, like energy efficiency that makes sense regardless of what energy portfolio you're pursuing in terms of generation. Ardour Capital is a firm. We're a full-service investment bank, so we do corporate finance services, capital raises, M&A, institutional sales, equity research, and recently we've moved into asset management. We have passive investments, which are UITs and ETFs based off of our family of indexes, and we've also recently launched a hedge fund based out of Luxembourg that again does solely the clean tech space. My personal background is I was an equity research analyst for 3 years, covering 16 publicly traded solar stocks, and I was also a legislative analyst for the firm across all the technologies. And I recently moved to the investment banking part of the company, where we do a little bit of everything, but focus on equity raises for public companies, primarily in the U.S. markets. Ardour was started in 2002, and the idea really by the principals was that green energy in 2002 was sort of an orphan sector. First, it didn't include quite as many of those verticals as I mentioned. It was primarily fuel cells, a couple of geothermal companies, and a couple of solar companies. And it was really negatively affected by the tech bubble burst of 2000. And the stocks all went down, the U.S. money got out, and as a consequence, the investment banks also got out. But the Europeans, thankfully, did not. The Switzerland money stayed. You had a lot of funds over there. like sustainable asset management, that were really dedicated to the space and in it for the long haul. But there was no investment banks covering, so it provided room for Ardour to come in and start doing investor conferences and providing research coverage. We had no idea at the time, though, that the sector would flourish as fast as it did. A lot of factors were going on, the commodity swings in fossil fuels, but you really have to credit the support of the European governments that subsidized it heavily, that really got the traditional high-profile renewables like solar and wind to get economies of scale, and then the prices were able to come down to a point where it was acceptable in other nations like the U.S., which weren't as willing to subsidize it to the same level as the Europeans, but we have more sun and more wind, so we don't have to as much, which is fortunate for us. In the last couple of years in the U.S., it's been very exciting in terms of volume growth, very scary from the financing side, and just to be on Wall Street, period. And I think there's definitely a big sense about a lost opportunity in the U.S. Sort of the idea for the sector is the Europeans propped it up, and the U.S. and China are supposed to take it from there and take it to the next level. And while we are still seeing growth on an absolute basis, it's been a little bit of disappointment just from the impression this current administration gave to the investment community that it was going to do that hasn't happened. If we go back to 2008, I think it was almost priced into the stocks that we were going to have some form of carbon regulation. As well, there was going to be some sort of clean energy bill, which was going to include a federal renewable portfolio standard, expanded powers of FERC to do interstate transmission and cost sharing to get these renewables to the population centers, and a major infrastructure build out in the $100 billion range. And we got almost none of that. Obviously, the clean energy bill didn't happen due to the focusing on health care and also allowing the environmentalists, I think, to really run the debate. I think in retrospect, cap and trade should have been taken off the table in late 2009 and allowed the renewable portfolio standard and transmission initiatives to continue. And that would have been a much more politically viable strategy. As far as the $100 billion, we actually got some of that, and that actually is the amount. If you just look at the stimulus bill on paper, that is technically what got allocated towards clean tech. But a lot of that just didn't end up building solar parks. A good chunk of it got taken by the various state governments that had problems of their own, and a lot of it is still sitting in Washington, just going through the motions of the typical bureaucracies and going back between agencies. It's getting a little better, but we're still seeing a good amount of delays, and meanwhile China has been ruthlessly efficient in terms of the way they subsidize it, and to the point where the WTO has noticed how successful they are. That is where we really see a lot of growth in terms of being an end market going forward. But anyways, all of this has been disappointing for investors, but it's a small setback. Wind, is the only one technology that is going to see an absence of growth. Installations were 10 gigawatts last year in the U.S., equal to pretty much the entire continent of Europe and China. That's going to take a hit this year because of low natural gas prices and the absence of federal legislation. But virtually all the other technology verticals I mentioned are poised for tremendous growth. Solar, Ardour's forecasting 100% growth in 2010 and 2011. It's off of a smaller base. It's going from 500 megawatts last year, 1,000 this year, 1,000 next year. And energy efficiency and smart grid were in many ways more advanced than Europe in terms of demand response products. So I think you do see growth, and I think it is challenging for the politicians to swallow the upfront cost that Konrad was talking about. But I think the way you do it successfully is to realize we're not trying to make renewables, part of 100% part of the solution. We're just trying to bringing them up from zero. And it makes sense in terms of a diversified energy portfolio. There will be a time when natural gas prices spike again, and coal and oil too. Not as soon as I would like, but we do feel that will happen. Solar and wind are free and completely unlimited resources, and it makes sense to do it, especially in the United States, where we have in the Southwest more sun hours than any point in the entire continent of Europe. And for wind, the same thing. From West Texas all the way up to Canada, we have better onshore resources than virtually any other industrialized nation on the planet. So there will be some winners and losers. We need a lot more work on the transportation end in terms of biofuels and advanced batteries, but we definitely see the sector only going up through a combination of public and private support.
We will turn it over now to Mr. Venter, who says he'll comment a little on a broader perspective as well, and please feel free to dovetail into the conversation that's already started. Thank you.
Well, listening to my colleagues, I'm very thankful. I think I have a much easier job in life. I don't have to worry about running a large company and dealing with government and political pressures, nor am I locked in completely to energy. At Ingalls Snyder, we generally invest in publicly traded equities, and we can go anywhere we want. In the 90s, we were doing technology, and we've been in resources and energy a lot recently. Talking about green energy, the question I think one has to ask right off the bat when you start is, why are we going to invest in it? What is the purpose? Is it climate change and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions? Is it national security and energy self-sufficiency? Or is it to make money? And depending on which of those approaches you take, you're going to go in a different direction. Give you an example for the U.S. This applies to the U.S. only. If you're talking about a significant way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the American Gas Association, i.e. the trade group for the natural gas producers, will tell you that if you made one simple mandate from Washington, invested no money, you could meet the U.S. 2020 greenhouse gas emissions targets tomorrow. And how do you do that? The 51% of the electricity in the United States is generated by coal. The natural gas is typically peaker plants, so they're only running the average natural gas-fired electric generating station is only running at about 25% capacity. If you up that to 50%, you just mandate it to run at 50, which still should give enough room for the peak to handle the peak loads. And you shut down an equivalent number of the dirty coal-fired power plants, you just met the U.S. target for 2020. Nothing else required. Now, I've talked to some environmental skeptics on this, and they will say, you'll get halfway there. You won't get there. But whichever you're talking about, whether it's a skeptical view of that statement, i.e. you'll only get halfway there, or you'll get all the way there, that's a pretty big dent. So when you look at greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, you have to look at a broad array of things. You can't rule out the fossil fuels entirely here. And natural gas is by far the cleanest. A short comment on natural gas. With the advent of the shales, I see some increase in natural gas. I own some natural gas stocks, but I don't see them going through the roof. I don't think we're going to get back to $15 and even $8 an MCF anytime soon. We're about 3 or 4 now. I could see it going to maybe 5, 6, but maybe on a peak you could get a little higher. You have had displacement with coal on that. If you're looking at energy self-sufficiency from a national defense standpoint, balance of payments, not having to be worried about the Middle East, then you're really talking oil. I mean, oil is the issue. It's nothing else. And the guy I would recommend you take a look at on that score is Amory Lovins, who's one of the founders of the Rocky Mountain Institute. Lovins has written a book on winning the oil endgame. It's a fascinating study. Lovins has a house at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains that's off the grid, and if you ask him how he did it, he says half of it's Victorian engineering rediscovered, and the other half is high tech. But he's got a plan to get us off imported oil that is a pretty realistic plan if we committed to it. So, and the third thing is, what if you make money? Well, that's what I do, or try to do. In general, when we're investing our clients' money, we worry about risk, and we worry about risk in an old-fashioned way, not with all the quantitative stuff, betas and all that stuff. And our view is political risk is very real here. And what the government chooses to do or not do, and what they think they're going to do, and then change their mind to do, is a huge unknown. So right now, very few of us are invested in any publicly traded companies that are wind, solar, or any of that. Where we are invested, we look for areas that aren't dependent upon the government because we think that's just too risky, because we have the freedom to do that. When you look at, and on the solar side, China is subsidizing it like crazy, and some of you have probably seen the articles about Silicon Valley having to readjust because the Chinese are just going like gangbusters on solar. Where an area we try to stay in touch with each of these areas. I mean, switchgrass in the bio area, and go on down, algae, etc., to see if anything's coming up. But so far, we haven't seen anything that we're that convinced can stand on its own. So, what we've looked at, the area we do think is very significant, is energy, what we call energy efficiency. And the background on that is we have a large amount of electric generating capacity in this country, I suspect Europe also, that it's only used for a very few hours a year on that very hot August day when everybody turns on their air conditioners. So you've got this plant sitting idle 99, 98% of the year doing nothing. There's a wholesale power market where the power companies trade electricity, and the electricity spikes like crazy on a day like that. Now, if you can find a way to reduce the peak load, you reduce the overall level of capital that you need in this sector. You save us all money, and you save the companies money. So there are a number of ways people are talking about doing that. There's a company up in Boston called Enernoc that will go into, actually let me start with one that I know personally, Converge, which has been less successful at this, but I have a Converge box at my house. And they write me a very modest check a year, but the agreement is that they can turn off my central air conditioners at my house on a hot summer day. They say and typically maybe they'll turn me off for 10 minutes and the neighbor off for 10 minutes, and they'll cycle through, but they'll cut the peak. So all of a sudden I win, the power company wins, we've made a significant reduction. Enernoc does this only on an institutional level, and they've been more successful. And they will go into hospitals. Obviously, they're not going to cut the emergency room, but there may be stock rooms and other things, and there are other places that they can cut buildings. And the deal is, if the power price goes up by a factor of 10 at one of these times, then the institution gets a piece of it, Enernoc gets a piece of it, and the power company saves money. So everybody wins here. That's an idea of one way to level it. The next thing we think is coming too is smart meters, so that you can run your dryer, etc., at night, off cycle, because electricity at night is going to be very cheap. In theory, it's one of the pluses of the electric car. Lovins has talked about and how far this goes. There are all kinds of issues with electric cars. We don't know yet quite the whole, both environmental and costs of them, but one of his views is if you have a fleet of electric cars and you charge it at night, which is when the wind blows, by the way, typically, if you want to use wind power for it. It's also when the energy is very cheap. You drive to work, you plug in, and you have a contract with the power company that they can drain, you decide, 10% of the juice out of your battery. And you've got all those parked cars, so at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the power company drains a little juice out of your battery, so you charge it at a cheap price, sell some of it back at a very rich price. You make money, and again, the power company makes money. So when you think about the potential capacity of all the automobile batteries in the United States, that's actually a fairly substantial amount of energy. Hawaii is starting to work on this and doing this for some electric cars, and they've got some wind energy going on. So from our standpoint, we look at it in terms of just simply making money. We don't want to put our clients' funds at risk at the whims of the politicians. We try to look for the areas where we think there's real money, where there's a real return on investment that can be made, where there are long-term trends, and so far that's been in the energy efficiency area rather than the others. Not to say there's not going to be huge growth in all of those. The question is there going to be profitable growth? And the flip side of it too is when we look at solar, we think it's a little bit like the PC industry in the early 1980s. There were lots of little companies making PCs, and there are lots of solar companies working. And some of these are going to be huge winners, and a lot of them are going to be out of business. So that's.
I can't imagine a more fertile ground for conversation. We have, beginning with our European guest, a call for some government consistent policy objectives needed. Some problems with some of them that have shown up in this country, and an almost, well, let's stay away from that and let's look at some alternative ideas that are also existing.
From a private investor standpoint.
From a private investor standpoint.
I'm not saying that's good public policy.
I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Right.
So let me open it to the floor. We'll take questions from anyone who's got them, and you can direct them either to a specific panelist, or if you've got questions that are for any of the panelists, just please let me know.
At what price of fossil fuels, like on the open market, do you think, like if they get to a specific price, upwards of $200 a barrel for crude oil, do you think that'll be a point where it'll turn from a regulated environment for green energy to a supply and demand environment for green energy, a market environment?
Is there anyone in specific, or
just in general? Like, do you think that there's a certain tipping point at fossil fuels?
The first point I would say is that oil has nothing to do with solar and wind. Oil makes cars go. It is not generating an electricity generation fuel. It supplies, I think, less than 5%. The apples to apples comparison is coal, and to a lesser extent natural gas, gas more arguably because it's where the growth is. So for that basket on the electricity generation, I don't know where the exact break-even point is. Unfortunately, I would agree that we're probably not going to get there, and we have to hope for developments within the exact solar side. On your question of oil, that is a direct driver for biofuels and electric vehicles. And when we say electric vehicles, we're really talking about the battery technology, and lithium-ion is really what we have now. And I think any increase would certainly drive up R&D, and you would see new companies pop up here and there. But unfortunately, on the transportation side, green energy is not there yet in terms of commercialization. If you look at the whole spectrum of renewable energy, we have a few technologies that are commercially viable, which are solar and wind in certain pockets. On the transportation side, which is where oil is relevant, we're not there yet. To my understanding, I mean, Ardour, I'm the lawyer of the group, but our chemists and engineers that I rely heavily on say the price of the lithium batteries is nowhere near it needs to be for mass adoption, nowhere near the price of oil is, and the same with second generation biofuels. Corn ethanol works to some extent, but there's no government mandates for any growth, and the public doesn't really seem to have the appetite. The algae, the switchgrass, the wood chips, there's certainly appetite if oil goes up, but there again, there is no company out there that is producing second or third generation biofuel at commercial scale, and to my understanding, we're still waiting for a breakthrough.
I think there's some questions when you think about the biofuel side too. At what point, corn-based ethanol, environmentalists, I know a lot of committed environmentalists who want nothing to do with corn-based ethanol, because when you look at the net effect on greenhouse gas emissions, corn-based ethanol doesn't work. I mean, sugar beets, there are studies that will say it works a little bit, doesn't work, it's negative. It's sort of break even at best. It's not a big dent. Sugar beets, the way the Brazilians are doing it, sugar cane and that sort of thing, that can work better. But you get into the question, particularly when you're talking about corn and some of these things and competing for cropland. At what point do you want to have transportation fuel compete with food prices and drive food prices up? That's why I think looking at things like, ultimately, if you're going to do biofuels, things like the switchgrass, where you can grow that in areas that are not necessarily prime cropland may work, but the technology isn't really there yet.
Yes, sir.
You all touched on the fact that consumer cooperation and government implication is essential to support the renewable energy sector. And what do you do and what could you do as companies to better educate consumers and help the government expedite its processes to better understand renewable energy is not only a good investment but also essential to protecting the earth?
I don't know if you mean me, but I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I would use the following answer. If I would be able to answer your question, I would not be the CEO of a company. I will lecture at Quinnipiac University. Let's say this is one of the most difficult issues, I think, in all the countries of the world, because I will take an example. Everybody was dreaming of how to have a coal-fired power plant without any CO2 emission. We learned, and I think this is the truth, in all the countries, in some more, in some less, we have to rely also in the future on coal-fired power plants generating electricity. But in doing so, we have to face the problems with the CO2 emissions. What does it mean? It means that if we take the climate change serious, then we have to produce energy from coal without CO2 emissions, and this is possible. So we are going, even in my company in Germany, we are now going for 2 pilot projects where we want to demonstrate, and not only technology-wise, but also economy-wise, that this is going to happen. What does it mean? It means that we have to capture the CO2 and we have to store the CO2. And once the idea was presented, everybody was happy. Once the idea is going to be implemented, everybody is complaining, because nobody wants to live on CO2 storage. So what does it mean? And this is not only because of this project. I think it's all. You have wonderful offshore wind parks. You have the technology. You can do it even economically. It's on the way. Everywhere in the world, companies are building offshore wind parks. First, once it is a dream, you believe offshore is far away of onshore. But once you implement offshore, it looks like that it is almost onshore, because people see the wind park and then they start to complain about it. And even energy production issues or gas pipelines which are going under the airs, are people complaining about it. So whatever you do, whatever we do, people are complaining. You cannot, and the closer the project is, the bigger the complaints are. This is one of the reasons why in all the papers you can read, from the World Energy Council and even the national governments, what we need is a kind of social contract. The people have to accept it. And how to do this, I'm sorry, I don't know. But this is also the problem of, let's say, Europe, maybe also of the States, in comparison to China. In China, till now, so far, nobody complains. They can do what they want. And this is maybe one of the reasons why they, for the time being, are so successful. Yeah? So we have the dreams, but we are not able to implement it. The others have no dreams, but they implement it.
I would add, I think from a political constituency standpoint, there is a portion of the public who cares tremendously about climate change. There's another portion of the public, and they may or may not be the same people, who care a lot about national security. And I would submit that if we could start having rational discussions, calm and clear discussions, and not overpromise and overcommit, you could get both of those constituencies voting the same way, and that would be a majority. But too often they talk at each other and not to one another. And I think there have been a lot of over-promising on all sides, and it's sort of, we have to do it because it's right. But we have to talk and recognize people's legitimate concerns and talk those through. But I remember hearing Jim Woolsey, who was head of the CIA under Bill Clinton, talk at one point. He said, I'm a tree-hugging hawk. Was how he described himself. So he is an absolute believer in doing all that we can environmentally for both a combination of climate and national security reasons.
Do you have any comments on?
I think your question was specific to corporations and communities, right, in terms of what they could do?
Right, because I feel like some of what he was just touching upon, some of that responsibility, I feel like may fall on the private sector to alleviate some of the pressure in other areas in terms of that social contract that he was also speaking of, to make people realize that, understand that needs to come about.
Right, I'm not sure how. I think there's probably limits in terms of how much weight the community and corporations could do. But there are a variety of options that are growing in the last couple of years. You know, something like a voluntary rec market, which is small, but corporations like Johnson & Johnson's of the world purchase a large chunk of their electricity generation. Even if there isn't a solar park near them, they can go on in the open market and purchase an equivalent portion of it that would satisfy it. And there's a variety of sustainability initiatives they can do, you know, on their corporate offices. And you know, there's some companies like Google that take it a few steps farther. But I think there are small roles that they could play, but I'm not sure they're going to be the key driver.
Other questions? Back, yes, sir.
This is for Mr. Kreuzer. You mentioned several times the leadership that Germany has played in this, and you know, Hermann Scheer, who was one of the great leaders worldwide of renewable energy, died unexpectedly just 2 days ago, I believe. Could you say a few words about his legacy and whether his untimely loss will alter the policy of Germany going forward?
I have some difficulties to respond directly because as long as I'm living in Hungary, I don't know so much about the German guys. But let's say what I'm going to understand, and this is what I'm happy to respond is, this guy was for sure one of the pioneers, but not only he, many of them, and politically speaking, the green movement started as a very small and beautiful movement. Now it's a great movement. And if you look at the results of the politics, if you like it or you don't like it, you have to admit that they are quite successfully acting, and even, let's say, the other parties are going to be in line with their requirements, with their ideas. This is a fact. I think we all have to admit on that. You also know that these discussions, because these are very political discussions, they are in Germany, but also in Europe, but mainly in Germany, committed with nuclear energy. Because this movement is against nuclear and they are pro renewables. The official policy now is that nuclear is a given fact. It should be a bridge energy and working and operating as long as we can substitute it through whatever renewables. I don't know if this is theory, I don't know if this is fantasy, but for the time being, it's official policy. And what we have to admit is also that and this is the reason why I started to say, how would this discussion tonight look like if we would discuss it 20 years ago? Meaning that in 20 years we have achieved something what we did not believe 20 years ago that it would be possible to achieve. Politic-wise, energy politic-wise, but also we should not forget about technology. The technology has extremely developed, and we have now, let's say, efficient windmills. We never believed that this is possible. And you mentioned before smart grid and smart metering. 5 years ago, nobody spoke about this issue. Now it's on the table. And I totally believe that technology-wise, we will develop in the next 10, 15, 20 years products where we are generating electricity, where we are leading and steering electricity in a way we don't know about it today. But we have, and this I think is one of the most important issues for policy. Policy have to make a commitment, and policy have to give a room for development. If this is given, then technology, markets, companies, people are developing and moving. And this is exactly what happens since 20 years ago. And when I mentioned Germany as an example for Europe, then only because the German government a few weeks ago decided about a program. If you would have put it on the table 20 years ago, these people had to resign immediately. Now they have not to resign, as we recognized. They stay, and they will stay even for a longer time. And this commitment is important, that renewables in general and all the interconnected issues are going to develop. I do agree that there is some skepticism because we have to rely on politics, and can you rely on politics? Unfortunately, we should maybe rely more than we do, because without this, I think it's very difficult to develop anything. But despite of the risks, the political commitment is a crucial issue for the development of our energy structure in the future.
If I could just add too, first of all, Herman Scheer was a great figure in the space, and he will be missed. That said, I think Germany's going to be fine. The EEG, which is the core subsidy they have there, is really a beautiful piece of legislation, specifically because of the checkpoints it has, and its structure does not allow the market to get overheated. Specifically, I mean the feed-in tariff, the rates it sets, have natural digression points. When the country installs 4, 5, 6 gigawatts of solar, the subsidies automatically come down and cool the market. And it stands in staunch contrast to countries like Spain, which had a really unfortunate experience in 2008 where they copied the German subsidy program almost. They didn't copy that part of it, which they really should have, because they ended up installing about 10 times more solar than they realized, and now they're in a situation where they can't afford it. Germany really has been the leader in the space, and they're why they are going to account for about 50% of the solar installations this year, despite the fact that it's not very sunny in that country whatsoever. But yeah, but they have done a great system. It's unfortunately one that I don't think could be replicated in the United States, because we are so much more diverse in terms of our culture and our natural resources. But it definitely works for that country, and it's doing a service to the rest of the world by bringing prices down.
Thank you. Skeptics of wind and solar energy usually point to nuclear energy as being the clean and effortless alternative in the segment. I would like to hear a European-American battle shaping up in terms of opinions for nuclear energy, ethical issues aside. Thank you.
Americans first.
Sure, it is very much a debate in terms of what role it should play. You know, environmentalists are still largely opposed to it because of the waste issue. But if you go to Sierra Club's website, their policy on nukes hasn't been updated in about 30 years since the incident with 3 Mile Island. My own personal view is that it should have a place, specifically because nukes is a base load sort of power, and you know, with the solar and wind are largely, or wind, solar especially, is largely a peaking source, and I think it is a smart thing to have a diversified energy portfolio. Unfortunately, I don't see it happening in the U.S. I think there is still so much opposition, and while President Obama has attempted to create a nuclear renaissance and provided loan guarantee money, virtually all the applications that I'm seeing have 8-year permitting processes. So there are some companies, Southern and NRG, that are going to make a run for it, but I don't see nukes playing a significant growth in the U.S. I would expect more in China and Europe.
I would agree with that. I think the cost factor hasn't really been realized too. I think costs of nuclear power plants are much greater than people realize when you're done. And you've heard that the companies have come out sometimes with some figures about what it's going to cost per megawatt, but as you get down closer and closer to the actual implementation stage, it's much more than that. It is the base load. I mean, just a word about base load. The big bad fuel in all this we talked about is coal. Why is coal still around? Well, several years ago, I remember looking at Exxon versus Peabody Energy, which is the largest U.S. coal company, and it's not quite as much now, but these are the numbers then. And I'm sorry to tell you, I can't remember how many BTUs this is for, but you were paying $3 per X number of BTUs when you bought Exxon for their oil, their reserves in the ground, gas and oil reserves in the ground. You were paying 8 cents for Peabody, for coal. So anybody asks why is coal still around, it's cheap. It's unbelievably cheap. And it's hard to displace. The natural gas at current prices is displacing some.
Our European representative?
Now, first of all, my company is quite much exposed in nuclear energy, so my statement is quite clear on that. But I also believe it's a fact that nuclear power, from a climate change issue, is CO2 neutral. That's a fact. So the problem, I think, is not because it's CO2 neutral. The problem is the security. But I also believe we have one of the best nuclear power plants, technology-wise, and we have also a very, let's say, responsible way how we are going to take care of the waste. I think this is one of the problems. So for sure, we are absolutely in line with the development of nuclear power also in the future. You may know that now we have negotiated with the German government about the prolongation of the lifetime of our existing nuclear power plants. We have been, on the one side, very successful because the operation time is now, in an average, prolonged by 12 years. Unfortunately, the profit we are going to do is going I think 2/3 or even more into a public fund and directly into the budget, so we don't earn as much into our pockets as we did in the past. But at the end of the day, the agreement is okay, and there is a new chance for nuclear power. Again, what I said, in the official meaning of the German government, nuclear power is a bridge energy, which it means we should not take it for eternity. We should use it, we should operate it as long as we can substitute it through renewables. And this is the other part of the policy, and I'm totally sure the German government will go this way. But both energies are not excluding themselves. Maybe they are an excellent combination, economical-wise and also from the CO2 emission side.
Yes, sir.
Question for all the panel. If we look at the domain of alternate energies, who are the world leaders in each of the fields, e.g. solar, tidal, geothermal, etc.? And then what are the implications for A, investment, and B, for the US economy?
Sure. Tidal is a very small market. I think the leaders are England and Scotland, but we don't see a lot of growth in that end. On solar and wind, traditionally, in terms of the manufacturers, I think is your question, correct? It started out, the Germans, you know, the Q-cells and the Connergies of the world really started it, but the Chinese are killing them in terms of market share for solar and wind, both. The Western companies and U.S. on solar, you got the First Solar and your Sun Powers, they did have an early lead, but the trends are just overwhelmingly moving towards China, and we see it continuing.
Yeah, what I wanted to add is that we should not underestimate what is happening concerning green energy in China, because when we are looking to China, then we see coal, then we see also a country which is developing nuclear power very, very fast, but they are also developing renewables also in a very speedy way. And I don't know how many wind parks they are building up every month, but it's significant. So, and when you're reading your own newspapers, and if you're reading the currency fight between United States and China for the time moment, it's also connected with renewables. Because the renewables, the products we are using in Europe and you are using in the States are coming from China, as far as I understand. So when your president or my chancellor is promising that we have to go into renewables because we will create a lot of jobs, then most of the jobs are created in China, unfortunately, and not in Europe and not in the States. But it's a problem of ourselves. So we should not only blame the others. We should first always, if we are complaining about that, blame ourselves and ask, what are we doing wrong in that respect?
I would just add, we are actually seeing, because of stimulus bill, a little bit of manufacturing capacity build out in the United States, but it's not as exciting as it sounds. Really, what we're seeing is a lot of final product assembly facilities. For solar, the panel manufacturing, the assembly facilities will be built in the U.S. so they can get the Made in the USA stamp and get built in solar projects without objections from Senator Schumer. However, those products, the polysilicon, the wafers, the cells will all be made in China, and you'll get cells basically shipped to the U.S. where they can be strung together, and that's where all the intensive labor is. So that'll be another trend I think you'll see continuing.
So, as I understand the answer to the question, the U.S. in no shape or form is leading this arena. And if we include nuclear into that equation, we can also say the U.S. doesn't need a war in nuclear either, right?
Well, I would say the U.S. as an end market is very significant. We're bigger than China right now in terms of the solar end market. Last year we were equal in terms of an end market in wind, and I do think we have advantages on smart grid, and we'll see what happens with batteries.
My implication is we're going to be buying these from the Chinese. We're not going to be selling them to the Chinese, right?
Correct.
Other questions? Please.
Why haven't utilities taken advantage of one of our most energetic resources, which is hydrogen?
Hydrogen?
Hydrogen combustion.
As someone explained it to me one time, and I'm no expert in this, I'll leave it to my colleagues, but unlike other fuels, you have to make hydrogen. You can make it with electrolysis. You know, one of the theories is you put a wind farm out there offshore and you break down the water to make it. But there's a cost to doing all that. So if you're going to generate electricity in a wind farm to create hydrogen, to burn hydrogen, are you better off using the electricity directly from that wind farm? Another way to make hydrogen, I believe, is natural gas. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think that's another way you make hydrogen. And same question. Are you better off just using the natural gas? And I believe hydrogen is also, you've got to worry a little bit about corrosion in parts and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there are a lot of theoretical potential, and there are companies exploring it. Your question, though, is specific to the utilities, and I would just add, a lot of utilities are neutral in terms of where the electricity comes from. A lot are still regulated and not allowed to be in the generation business. And they're also responding to state governments who would have renewable portfolio standards. And those standards are frequently define, what is renewable, and it's usually weighted heavily towards solar, wind, biomass, and geothermal. So it's frequently not up to them.
Yes, sir. In the back, I think you moved.
Cost being the issue, are we seeing further progress in the development and technology through R&D to possibly lower the costs of green energy and hopefully raise demand?
Question, yeah, it was just hard to hear up here. So the question is, in terms of cost, currently it's expensive. Are we seeing progress made that is lowering the costs, and how does that lowering of costs come about?
Yeah, let's answer in the following question. I think for everybody is clear that the costs have to be reduced, and I think there is a chance the more production in renewables energy will take place, the more products will be sold, and the better and the cheaper it can be constructed. On the one hand. On the other hand, what you can read, and what even played a role in the World Energy Congress in September in Montreal, that, let's say, the gap between costs of traditional energy and costs of renewables is not getting that close. And this will be a problem because the subsidy system is for the time being necessary to get renewables in place. But the subsidy system cannot stay, first, not on that level, and at the end of the day, it cannot stay at any aspect. So it has to go away. It has to escape from the scene. If this is not going to take place, the government budget have to pay for it, and this will not happen. So the cost reduction is essential, but nobody knows how it's going to work.
People I've heard speak have said we have a 100-year problem. A lot of the scientists feel that within 100 years we will get the technology down through a combination of cost reductions, as Konrad said, and efficiency increases in solar panels, and we will probably be able to operate a lot of the planet on solar-powered electricity in 100 years. We have a big bridge fuel problem of how do we get there without causing problems.
Yeah, in the near term, I would just add, we do see a lot of at Ardour, a lot of companies come through with efforts on R&D. But the real benefits in terms of price declines and closing that gap to grid parity is just scale. The subsidies that do exist facilitate markets all of a sudden becoming gigawatt scale. Just traditional economies of scale is really what's driving those price declines, and they have been extremely significant. Go back 6 years, the price of a solar system fully installed was probably close to $10 a watt, versus now it's a little over $3 on a utility scale system.
Rod, can you, I don't have the figures at the top of my head, but do you know them in terms of solar per kilowatt hour?
Yeah, the levelized cost of electricity.
Now versus, say, coal-fired power plant, to give them an idea.
Sure. And that's a good point, because that is the apples-to-apples comparison. Some companies produce a solar panel that's more efficient than the others, but the real metric to look at, certainly from an investor point of view, and for everybody, I think, certainly from the utilities point of view, is how much is the actual electricity cost. So ballpark, you have coal, at about 5 cents or so. Wind is anywhere between, 4 and 9, including a 2 cent per kilowatt hour subsidy from the federal government. Solar right now is in the mid-teens for a utility, for a farm, whereas you're looking at probably above 20 if you've got them above your roof.
Yeah, and is that with subsidies?
Yeah, it's about 3 cents or so. Includes solar is a different subsidy. They don't subsidize it by the generation of electricity. You just get 30% in the U.S. is just taken.
So an unsubsidized solar cost would be?
It varies
Sure.
wherever you are in the United States, but for a residential system, unsubsidized, probably mid-20s. If it's in certain parts of Connecticut, probably close to 30.
So that's 4 to 5 times coal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the gap we have to close.
Yeah. But I would point
And it's
out.
closing.
Yeah. But I would point out a solar farm. If you put it on 1,000 acres in the middle of the desert where nothing's there, then you're talking about with the subsidy, you're talking about low teens. And in the California market, where you got above average electricity prices, that is grid parity. Granted, it's with a subsidy, but even if you take it out, it's not that far off, and it's during the peak resources too. So arguably, it's not competing with the base load. It's competing with the natural gas peaker prices, which are, double or something of that scale.
And as a private investor, that's what I focus on. As a public citizen, I ask another very simple question: how much of our Defense Department is going to guarantee oil supplies from the Middle East? And if we didn't have to do that, could you afford to build all these solar farms and everything else, even if they aren't economic?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point too. I mean, when people talk about subsidies in renewables, I think it'd be great to take away subsidies for renewables, but take them away for fossil fuels too. Coal will still be cheap, probably,
right.
But oil will not be, $3 at the pump if you take away the subsidies across the board. All of a sudden, biofuel is competitive.
Well, thank you very much. One of the benefits of an academic environment is an educated discussion, and I certainly hope we all learned something. And I'd really like to give a round of applause and thank you to all of our panelists.